Welcome to the Pebble in My Shoe. My name is Miffy Hode and I'm your host here. The pebble in my shoe is an analogy for the inner niggle or knowing that becomes so insistent that we have to pay attention. We can ignore it only for so long and eventually have to stop to investigate it, listen to it, and honor what it's telling us. It becomes a catalyst for action to change something that no longer serves us. This can be something internal, like a belief or mindset. It can be about how we behave in certain situations or relationships. Or it can be something that changes our life trajectory, like ending a relationship, changing careers, or moving to a different place. Taking the action and making the change invariably requires courage, often a leap of faith, and at the very least, to try something new and outside of our comfort zone. Whatever the action or change happens to be, the pebble ultimately moves us to live more authentically, more aligned to our true nature. My intention for the conversations here is to inspire or offer hope to those of you who resonate with the stories shared, that you will hear something that supports you on your own journey, and if there's a pebble in your shoe, that you will find the courage to make the changes that align you closer with your authentic self. Let me introduce today's guest. Betsy Cornwell is a New York Times best-selling author, a writing teacher, a private mentor, and a retreat leader. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Notre Dame and a BA from Smith College, and she currently teaches writing at the University of Galway, Kylemore Abbey, and online. She lives in a historic knitting factory on the west coast of Ireland, which she's working to turn into a funded, childcare-inclusive arts retreat space for single mothers and other twice-marginalised single parents. It's my pleasure to welcome Betsy Cornwell. So, hi, Betsy. You're really welcome to the Pebble in My Shoe podcast. Thanks for being a guest.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. So, Betsy, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Just an overview of who you are and what you're doing.
Sure. Well, I am a writer. I live in Connemara in County Galway. I'm American by birth, as I'm sure you can tell from my accent, but I've lived in Ireland for 12 years, and I teach creative writing at the University of Galway and also through retreats at Kylemore Abbey and online. I teach both group online classes and one-on-one writing mentorship. I am also a New York Times bestselling author of 6 novels, the most recent of which is called Reader, I Murdered Him, and it is a sort of revenge-themed sequel to Jane Eyre. And I also have a memoir coming out next year in both the US and the UK, which is about sort of my story of single parenthood and of crowdfunding the purchase of a historic knitting factory here in Connemara, which I now live in with my young child, and am turning into a childcare inclusive retreat space for my fellow single parents. So that is sort of where the focus of both my life's work and my writing have been for the last few years.
Wow, that's a lot. That is a lot. So 6 best-selling novels. Wow.
Well, one of them was a bestseller.
Okay,
but,
yeah, well.
but I'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah, congratulations. Wow.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Betsy, I'm always fascinated about what drives people, what makes people make the choices they make, because very often the choices we make and the dreams we have come with rocky road to walk along, and the path is never that smooth. So yeah, are there any pebbles in your shoe that you can think of that you'd like to sort of talk about?
Well, I mean, when you give me the way you define that phrase, I guess, as just sort of something that you become aware of that you have to change. I don't know if I have any right now, but certainly the way the Knitting Factory project came about sort of fits into that description, I suppose. I always wanted to be a writer. I remember being 6 years old and looking at books and wanting to write books, and I'm very proud and grateful that I get to do that work now. But I certainly never thought of myself as a business founder or business owner at all. I think of myself as a creative, and the idea of doing bookkeeping and business administration is very intimidating to me. And so I came around to it in a sort of strange way, and in a way that stems from my writing work. Because when I became a single parent, I left an abusive marriage when my child was very young, and I was briefly homeless, and that was a very scary period of time. And it was at the same time that the housing crisis was worsening in Ireland, as it still is now. And it was very difficult for me to find housing that was at all affordable or stable for myself and my child. And being a millennial, I kind of had dismissed the idea of home ownership long ago. I thought it would never be available to me. But when I became a single parent and was struggling to provide stable housing for my child, I started dreaming of home ownership in a way that I never had before. It seemed urgent in a way that it never had. And so and at the same time, I was receiving a lot of support from the local domestic violence center in Galway, and I joined the single parents group there and was really inspired by the women that I met, the other single moms there. They really made me proud of being a single mother, which is something that is still very stigmatized, and it made me realize that I'm more proud of being a single mom than I am of lecturing at university or writing a bestselling novel or any of my other accomplishments. And I started to wish that single mothers were more celebrated, So I started sort of dreaming of a space that I could turn into a family home for myself and my son, that I could also offer as a kind of haven for other single parents. And as, an accomplished published writer, I kept seeing opportunities for writing residencies and things like that, but that I would qualify for, but that I couldn't do because either for sort of financial reasons or because they didn't provide childcare. So all of those sort of dreams and longings coalesced into this concept of finding a building that I could both live in with my child and provide to other single parents. And I looked at several different buildings and started to think about crowdfunding and that kind of thing. And then in spring of 2020, right before COVID happened, I found the Knitting Factory, and it had been on the market for quite a few years, which I think is why the owner agreed to let me try to crowdfund the purchase of it. And over the next 2 years, I ran a crowdfunding campaign and ended up raising the purchase price of the building, and that's where we live now. And I actually just 2 weeks ago had my second single mom resident, a Navajo single parent from the US who brought her 2 older kids with her. And it was really great seeing my child get to play with those kids, and to get to just have some fellowship with that other single parent. And so, still the sort of business owner side of things is very challenging and sometimes very intimidating for me, but I do really believe in the mission of the project. And it has brought my son and me to a stable home, which is the biggest gift, that I've ever received. So it's a project that I'm really proud of.
Wow. Yeah. And so you should be. Gosh, that's massive. And I love that it's something that you identified as being something you want for yourself. And therefore see the value in it for others, because I think that sometimes we have these ideas about what we might want for ourselves, but because it's not happening anywhere else, that whole thing, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And it's like, because you don't see it happening elsewhere, right. It's like, oh God, well, that's me on my own then, but you don't see it that way. You've got this outside the box thinking.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think the two things I'd say about that is I agree with you. I think, like, as a writer, I've always, and most of my novels are all for young people, although my memoir is my first sort of adult market book. And I think especially writing for young people, that idea of creating a sort of the kind of story you want to see, or creating the world you want to exist in, is really important to a lot of children's writers, and certainly was very important to me as a child when I would read books that sort of gave me a vision for the kind of life that I wanted to have. And so I think being a writer or being a storyteller, you sort of exist in that mindset anyway. But one of the reasons I wanted to write this memoir about single parenthood and the Knitting Factory project is I wanted to tell a story of single motherhood that isn't bleak and depressing, and certainly there's there's some bleak and depressing things that happen in the memoir, but you kind of can't, it's hard to imagine something that you haven't seen, and so I wanted to talk about how if someone is thinking about leaving a violent marriage, that the road ahead of them is not necessarily going to be only terrible. And so I think telling stories like that can help. And then also, I think a problem that comes up with a lot of nonprofits and social enterprises is that they're trying to provide a need that isn't their own, that they're sort of looking to, in a sort of paternalistic or condescending way, looking at other communities and deciding for them what they need. And something that I am proud of about the Knitting Factory is that it's very peer-based. Like, I am a single parent providing the kind of support that I wish I received. And so it's not like I am condescending to provide charity to these poor single moms or something like that. Like, I see them in entirely a peer way. And I do think that helps with sort of creating the model for what kind of support I want to offer.
That's really powerful. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I'm hearing in all of that, Betsy, is that idea of not providing a service, like, there are service providers out there who sort of offer something to people, and what you're talking about there is how, because it's peer based, and it's that we're all, I'm not articulating what I mean very well at all. You articulated it much more beautifully than me, but I just love that, because you're doing it for people, not to people, and you're doing it with people, not to people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I've received so much from this project as well. Like, I have a home because of this project, so it's not purely charitable either, I suppose. But right, I think it's important to I mean, maybe it's a version of the golden rule, I suppose, that you want to offer the kind of help that you want to receive.
It's lovely. And being the change you want to see in the world, that is, there's echoes of that. There's more than echoes of that in that. You said how you didn't want the story of single motherhood to be bleak, because it can be, and especially in the current climate. And I was a single mother in my teens, and again in my adulthood. Yeah, it can be quite a lonely place. And so, I love that you want to change that, not just the narrative, but the actual experience of it for yourself and for others, especially in that creative space.
Yeah. So one of my, and I will just say, like, I think, so when I was doing research for the memoir, there's more statistics available about the US, but I know in the US, a quarter of households are headed by a single parent now. So I think it feels very isolated, but it's increasingly very common, and so I think it's important to realize that this isn't just a sort of something that happens to a few people, but it's a huge part of how society works now. And so to think about providing support for single parents is providing support for a pillar of how society works. And I think that's important. And also, one of my favorite writers and artists is a woman named Lynda Barry. And she is she started her career as an underground cartoonist. And she now works as a graphic novelist. And she is a professor at the University of Wisconsin. And she tells a story about sort of the healing power of storytelling that is my favorite that I've ever heard, and that just makes so much sense to me. And she talks about phantom limb pain. So basically, there's a doctor whose name I can never remember, but he specialized in phantom limb pain. And the way that he figured out how to cure it was with mirrors. So there was a patient that he had who had lost one of his hands, but he had a sensation of a really tightly clenched fist in this missing hand that never went away, and it caused him a lot of pain. And what the doctor ended up doing is he had him sit down in front of a mirror and put down both his hands, and the mirror was angled in such a way that his remaining hand was reflected as if it was connected to his other arm, so that from the man's perspective, it looked like he still had both hands. And then the doctor had him clench his remaining hand really hard so that it felt the same as his missing hand did, and then release it. And when he watched the mirror image of his hand release, he felt the phantom limb pain release as well. So Linda Berry basically argues that stories do the same thing, that they provide an image of something. And when somebody feels like they have an unsolvable problem in their life, if they watch someone else in a story solve that problem, it can help them feel like they can do the same thing. And so I guess my highest hope for what the memoir would do is that it would show someone a way to unclench that fist, you know.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, it's reminding me that I remember reading years ago how when we read a book, my dad used to read to us as kids, and I had these wonderful images in my head. He read us the Narnia series, you know, C.S. Lewis. And I remember when they finally got round to making TV series of it and a movie of it. And I remember going, no, but that's not what it looks like, because in my head I had created these. But I remember reading how when we read a book, read a story, the visual cortex of our brain fires up in the same way as it would if we were watching it on screen or watching it play out in real life. So it just, what you're saying there makes total sense. And I love that visual connection and that personal connection and that hearing and seeing and feeling, because we get emotionally engrossed as well, don't we? And involved and invested in these stories, that when it resonates, it can do that healing work. Yeah, thank you for that.
But C.S. Lewis had one of my favorite quotes is C.S. Lewis, and it's "We read to know we're not alone." And so I think that's very true.
Betsy, can I ask you about your marriage? Is that okay?
Yes, I mean, there'll probably be some things I can't say for legal reasons, but sure.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. No, I really want to ask you about, I suppose you did allude to the fact that there was domestic violence involved, and I suppose I want to ask you about that because I know how hard it is to leave a relationship, and I know how hard it is to leave an abusive relationship. So I wanted to ask you about that, if that's okay. It might seem trite to refer to it as a pebble in your shoe, but what were the things that kept at you to get yourself to safety and your child?
Yeah, I mean, I was very in love with my husband when we got married, and really even when I left him, I was still in love with him, which is one of the things that was hard about it. And so I think it was mainly emotional abuse, and I think that's an important thing to talk about, that domestic violence isn't always physical. And even for the majority of the other women in the survivors group at my domestic violence center, it was not physical violence. It was emotional, psychological, financial, verbal things, and so I think a lot of people discount their experience because it's not physical, or say, oh, he doesn't hit me and therefore it's okay. And I think actually all men benefit from that low standard, because any man who doesn't hit his wife can tell himself that he's a good husband. But that's a terrible bar to set, I think, And so for me, it became a lot about coercive control and emotional abuse, but I still really didn't want to see it because I really loved my husband. And it wasn't actually until my GP suggested we go to marriage counseling, and the marriage counselor then told us in very bold terms that what was happening in my marriage was severe emotional abuse. And that was really distressing for me to hear. And it was really distressing, I think, for my husband to hear as well. And so when I first started going to the domestic violence center, it was to try to help my husband stop hurting me, and I think that's a common experience as well. But then what it really came down to for me was the kind of home that I wanted my child to grow up in, because I also grew up in a home with a scary dad, although in a very different way. And so when I finally decided to leave, it was because I thought my child deserved a safe home. And looking back now, of course, I also deserved a safe home where I wasn't being abused. But I think, again, like many women, it wasn't, I couldn't say that for myself at the time because I really loved my husband and I was committed to our family and so on and so forth. But the line that couldn't be crossed for me was the kind of environment my child was going to grow up in. And so then thankfully that's what it allowed me to get myself out of that bad environment as well, was getting my child out of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like you. Gosh, you're so articulate. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, see, I just wrote a book about all of this.
Yeah, but no, but like that is also very powerful. You know, I only very recently said to somebody very close to me, because some meme had come up in a news feed, you know, for me around, you know, that just because he didn't hit me doesn't mean it wasn't abuse. And I went, yeah, God, that is so it. And that is so how a person in my life justified, well, I never laid a finger on you. Right
totally.
Now, the fact that there was a fist hole in every door in the house, that's a whole other story, but he never laid a finger on me. But the abuse was emotional, the abuse was coercive, the abuse was that you were walking on eggshells the whole time. And so you start to think that it's sort of something you're doing, or you know, and all of that. And then when there's children involved, it gets so complex, doesn't it? Because you feel that by you leaving, you're upsetting this apple cart for everybody else as well. So I think it's very refreshing, you know, to hear you say that just so beautifully.
Thank you. Well, there's a wonderful writer about abuse called Lundy Bancroft, and he has a book called Why Does He Do That? That I think anyone who knows any man should read. It's just fantastic. But one of the things he says is a man who punches walls or hits the furniture is trying to let you know how much he wants to hit you. And like, it is intentional, you know, and I think people like to think of actions like that as just a loss of control. But and again, a really good question that Lundy Bancroft asks is, if that's the case, why doesn't he do it in front of his boss? You know, he does it in front of you to scare you. He does it in front of the people that he has power over, and it is a threat. And I think, and it does often end up escalating, but, you know, I think those things are not a loss of control. They are sort of an attempt at gaining control over another person through fear, which is abusive.
Yeah,
you know? So
absolutely. Yeah. And the courage then, Betsy, the courage it takes to step away. I mean, you're describing how you're still in love with your husband, you know, and how you have to make this move on behalf, and initially you saw it as for the sake of your child, but obviously it was for your sake too. And so can you talk to me about the courage it takes?
I don't know. I kind of like, I feel a bit resistant to that. I think as it was happening, I was kind of just reacting to what was happening and doing what I felt needed to be done on a given day. And I think, you know, looking, and it's sort of in my case, and again, I won't go into too many details, but things reached such a crisis on a particular day that I felt like the only thing I could do was take my baby to the domestic violence center, and because I wasn't safe at home. And so that just felt like a survival choice rather than being brave, although of course it was, but that's not how it felt at the time. And I think, you know, I know that statistically someone will leave an abusive relationship 6 times before they leave for the final time, because, you know, there's so many things that draw you back to that relationship for any number of reasons. And for a lot of women, they're financial reasons. They are unable to survive on their own because they're financially dependent on their abuser. Or people of any gender, obviously, but more frequently women. So I think a lot of the times when you do, or when I did something that I can look back on and say that was brave, and I think with crowdfunding the house as well, it was a sort of unconventional, courageous thing to do, because it was so unlikely that it would work. But at the time, it was a survival choice. It was just, this is the best path forward that I can see out of a range of options, none of which feel great, you know? And so I think, and actually it's funny, you know, my kid is 7, and he talks a lot about, he'll say he was brave, or he'll say he was not brave a lot of the time. And so it's something that comes up lately with him. And I try to talk to him about, you know, being like, if he feels scared to do something, he'll say he's not brave. And and then I will say, well, being brave is when you are afraid, but you do it anyway. If you're not afraid, then you can't be brave. But but it's, I don't know, it's something that I guess talking endlessly with his 7-year-old about is making me sort of doubt my own definitions of it, I guess. So
yeah, and I hear you though, that there is that kind of moment where there is some kind of force that is bigger than you, that is actually driving this thing and getting yourself to safety, or making that sort of final decision that, yeah, this is done now, I have to go, or whatever the situation is. But there is some kind of energy that rises in you. That was my experience of it anyway, where it was just like, no, it's now time, and that's what carries you. And maybe the courageous part happened way before there, where maybe when you were formulating the thought that, do you know what, I will probably leave this at some point, maybe that was the point of courage. I don't know, but yeah. I'm also hearing in there, Betsy, about the choice to, and the decision to crowdfund your home. And what I'm hearing in there is this desire to remain true to what your vision was for you and your son, and that was very much a driving force then, in terms of whether or not it was courage, but that it was that what drove you to continue with that. Because you said it took 2 years, I think, did you?
Yeah, well, I mean, so it was actually pretty much this week, 4 years ago, that we moved into the knitting factory, which I've been thinking about a lot. But so we moved in. I found the place in spring of 2020, got in contact with the owner, agreed to a sort of rent to own scheme with him, during which time I would try to do some crowdfunding. And my plan to buy the house was actually not crowdfunding at first. That was sort of a supplement to my main plan, which was to write a book about the house and sell the book and then use that to buy the house, because I had written several books by then. And so my plan was to write a book proposal about, in a sort of under the Tuscan sun way, about moving into this dilapidated house and fixing it up. And I had a platform as a writer, so I had some hope that would work. It did not work, but that was my plan. So, and then just to sort of get some funds to do some of the necessary repairs when we moved in and that kind of thing, I started doing some crowdfunding. Then as the project went on, the crowdfunding sort of took off. I think there were a lot of things about the project that resonated with people. The single parenthood aspect of it, which I wrote very transparently about my experience of single parenthood and the reasons why I wanted to provide the space both for my kid and for other single parents. And some of the first supporters of the project were women who had been single parents at some point in their lives, and also the children of single mothers. And that was especially moving to me to hear. I heard from quite a few adult children of single moms who said they were donating because they really wished a space like that had existed for their mom, and that they really appreciated what their mom had done for them when they were growing up. And that was, I think you have such a chip on your shoulder any mother is worried about not being a good enough mother, but I think especially single mothers, you get constant messages from everyone that you have failed your child, and all these terrible things are going to happen to them because you're a single parent and all of this. And so it was really healing to hear from all these grown-up children of single moms who were really lovely people and who really appreciated their mothers. And so I wrote the proposal, and then it kind of turned out basically that and it's kind of, publishers don't really want to take on a story that hasn't happened yet if you're not a very famous writer, which makes sense. It was kind of like buying a book is a gamble, and if the story hasn't finished yet, then you can't guarantee that what the ending of the book will be. And so they just, the proposal got nice feedback on my writing and that kind of thing, but they were like, we can't gamble on this story because it hasn't finished. And so then I just ramped up the crowdfunding and worked really hard on so then I got up to a down payment amount from the crowdfund. I applied for mortgages and business loans. I was rejected from all of those because I'm a lower income single parent who's an immigrant to Ireland, and it just was not going to happen. But then finally, on the very last day before the deadline that the owner had given me to either raise the funds to purchase the house or to have to move out so he could sell it to someone else, on that very last day, I got together the purchase price, and I had one donor who called me in that very last night and gave me an astounding donation that allowed me to purchase the house. And some of that fundraising did come from loans from friends that I'm paying back and that kind of thing. But I did raise the whole purchase price, so the house is fully in my name. I don't have a mortgage with it, which is huge. So yeah.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Yeah, I don't know, just hats off to you. I think that's great. And it must take great tenacity. Were you always tenacious, Betsy?
For sure. I mean, I think you have to be a writer, like to write long pieces anyway. And, like I said, I'm a writing teacher at the University of Galway, and I do writing mentorship online. And I think tenacity is the defining trait that says whether someone will finish their book or not. It is not talent or anything else, really. It's just because at some point when you're doing any long project, you fall out of love with it, and when it's something creative, you start doing a creative project because you only want to write a book if you really love books, or you only want to write a piano sonata if you are a great music lover. And so you have these huge aspirations of writing something beautiful, and then you're doing the draft and it's not as good as you hope it would be, and that's very humbling and devastating to the ego and all of that. And so it is that sort of grit and determination to finish no matter what is the thing that pulls you through that kind of ego death of not being as good an artist as you want to be. And with, especially like with my university students, I teach a novel writing class, and the deal is they either finish a novel draft in my class or they fail the class. And that is a really good motivator for them to get it done. And it works. Like, they all do it. With my adult clients, I can't hold that over them. There's nothing I can really do to them if they don't do their writing. And so it becomes very clear that that is the trait that sees them through it or not, is that kind of stubbornness, I guess. And I am very stubborn, so I think that serves me well in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Can I ask you, Betsy, then about parenting, and how
Sure.
is that for you? How do you find being a parent generally?
Right. It is hard to distill, I guess. I mean, I adore my child. I think I'm a different person now than I was before I feel about 20 years older than I was when he was born, even though he's 7. And part of that is like the sleep loss for sure. Like, he didn't sleep through the night till he was 4. And I'm still it's funny, I'm 35 now. So a lot of my friends are only starting to have kids. And so a lot of them will ask me, like, a lot of them are very afraid of childbirth, and that's what they will ask me about. And I am lucky, and I know I'm lucky to say I had a smooth birth, and for a lot of people it can be very traumatic. So I'm not trying to discount that. But I always say, that's not the hard part, and like, childbirth is one day and or a few days, but like, even if, no matter what, it's only a few days. And then the sleep loss, I would give birth without drugs 10 times before I would lose that much sleep again. And that's what I always tell people, it's so hard. And then also I was doing it on my own, and I was experiencing the traumatic breakdown of my marriage and all of that. So that made that harder as well. But that's when I think about what I want to have another kid. It's the intensive 24 hours of baby care that goes on for years that makes me wonder if I want to do it again or not. Now, that said, I really am not one of the parents who regrets parenthood at all. I adore my child. I love our relationship. It has made me a different person in only good ways. I'm stronger now. I am more thoughtful. I think I'm a better person because I'm a parent, and it has led me to this project that I'm really proud of. And like I said, being a single mother is the thing I'm most proud of anything I've done. But that's in part because it's really hard. So it's like, what is parenting like for me? I don't know. Like, hard, but also great,
Yeah,
So.
it's not something you can necessarily sum up, is it?
Yeah. I heard someone say on the internet the other day, someone has an 18-month-old, and that someone had said to him, it's all joy and no fun. And that resonated with me for like what the baby years are like anyway. And I have fun with him now because we can, I don't know, we can like he can tell me jokes and stuff, but like, and the baby stuff is fun in a way, but I was so tired the whole time. It was really tough. So,
Sure.
yeah.
And dealing with all you were dealing with, like you say, you're going
Right.
through a massive trauma in your
Yeah.
own right,
Yeah.
and
Right.
trying to
Right.
protect him from as much of that as possible, and all of those things, isn't it? It's
Totally.
all complex. I like that though. Yeah. It's all joy, but not fun. Is that it?
All joy and no fun. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
like the paradox in that.
I knew what he meant anyway. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the questions I like to ask my guests, Betsy, is if you hadn't have followed the nudges and the desire or the vision that you have, if you hadn't followed any of those that you've talked about, what might your life look like instead?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I suppose for me, coming to Ireland is one of those. I first came to Ireland. I came here directly after graduate school. I did my MFA in creative writing at the University of Notre Dame, and I sold my first book while I was there. And it's called Tides, and it is sort of a reworking of some Celtic mythology about Selkies, which are seal people, basically. And so I came here in theory to do some research on Selkies, and I was doing help exchange at a hostel in the Aran Islands, and that is where I met my now ex-husband. And so I think so I'd probably still be in the United States, if I hadn't followed those nudges, and I didn't plan to move to Ireland when I came here. I thought I would just do some research for a few months. But then as soon as I came to Galway, I just loved it. And before I met my husband, I knew I wanted to live here, and I loved it so much. And I think, I was 24 then, and I've talked a lot about this with other friends of mine who now live in different countries from where they grew up. I think when you're young and you move to a different country, it seems very sophisticated and glamorous, and you're very impressed with yourself for moving to a new place. And but then as the years go on, and I don't regret it, and I'm an Irish citizen now, which I love, and I'm happy to be building a life here, and wouldn't really want to be living in the US right now, which is
That's a whole other
kettle of fish.
podcast.
Right, yeah. But you lose something that you don't know you're losing until it's gone, which is a sense of kind of belonging. And I think I always felt like a misfit as a child. I was sort of weird. I mean, I still am, but I was always sort of a weird kid, and I never felt like I fit in. And I didn't realize until I had been living here for a few years and I went back to visit a friend in New England that I always was a New Englander. And I didn't understand that until I left. And now I've spent, like I said, I've lived here since I was 24, my whole adult life. And I am culturally different now from my friends who have lived in the US their whole lives. I'll never be culturally Irish in the way that someone who grew up here is. And so that leaves me feeling always kind of displaced in a way. And it's a very privileged kind of thing to complain about, for sure. But it's a strange feeling. And I think only people who live in a different place than where they grew up know that feeling. And so I think a lot of my closest friends and my current partner is English, who lives in Ireland. And that's something that I think is very helpful to have in common, because it becomes almost its own kind of culture. Is like people who live in a different place, like that we have something in common, but it is something that you don't realize you've lost until it's gone, I think.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I do sort of resonate a bit. I grew up in Wales and spent the first 10 years in Wales and then moved here. So I was 10 moving to rural Ireland. And I do identify as Irish. I'm an Irish citizen now too, which I'm delighted about. But I do identify as Irish, I have to say. But that was a journey as well, because I kind of felt like nobody's child in a sense, for a long time. Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. I was really interested about the Selkie piece, actually, because there's a beautiful album, I don't know if you've listened to it, called Spell Songs. And there's a song on it about Selkies, and they mentioned Selkies throughout the whole album. It's a beautiful album that was inspired because of these words that were removed from the English dictionary because they were no longer current or relevant. Words like Selkie, even fern, and it's absolutely beautiful. You might enjoy it. That's why I mentioned it. So Spell Songs, it's called, is the album. And then there's some lovely, my husband and I used one of the tracks during our wedding ceremony. last year.
Oh,
But
lovely.
anyway, yeah, so I'll put some information in the show notes about it too. Betsy, can you tell us and the listeners about the old knitting factory and how, if there's somebody listening that's going, well, I'm a creative and I'm a single parent, and how can I get a piece of this action? So tell us about the
Right.
knitting factory and what people have to do to get in touch, or even just to find out more.
Yes. Sure. Well, we have a website. It's oldknittingfactory.com. So you can go there. And so basically the something that I've been thinking a lot about, and I think that's how we first got in touch, is sort of burnout, because I did get really burnt out just doing the crowdfunding to purchase the building as is. And it's a building. It really was a knitting factory. It was built in 1906. Local women knitted there for a long time. In the 1970s, the filmmaker Bob Quinn turned it into the world's first Irish language cinema, which is wonderful and incredible. And one of my long-term goals for the space would be to start showing Irish films here again. But we are far from there, because the sort of next step of the project is renovation. And that's what I've been sort of reckoning with in terms of the burnout that I've been feeling, both from single parenting and from recovering from my divorce and all these things, and just the work of doing the project. So I bought the building as is, and we're able to live here. And I do offer the guest space on Airbnb, so anyone can come and spend the night here. And a single parents, I offer it to on a sliding scale, so someone can get in touch with me through our page on Airbnb. Just let me know what you're able to pay, and I will put the booking through. And it's not an expensive space anyway, because the building has yet to be renovated. So it's quite simple. We share the bathroom. Some of the tiles are cracked in the bathroom, and, the water pressure isn't great and all of this. And when people come to stay, I can get very worried about the fact that the house hasn't been renovated yet. But thankfully, people are lovely, and people come, and it is a beautiful space. Has private lakefront. It's in a village that has 3 beaches, and it's Connemara, I still think, is one of the most beautiful parts of the world, and it is a special place that I really believe in. So the next step for me is getting renovations done. And I'm sure no one listening to this in Ireland will be surprised that it's been really hard to book tradespeople to get the house rewired or to redo the bathroom and that kind of thing. There's just a huge demand for tradespeople, and very few of them want to traipse all the way out to the middle of nowhere in Connemara to deal with a very old house. So I have gotten some support from the local enterprise office and places like that to start to look for grants to renovate the space. And I also am just now finishing the memoir about this project. I'm in edits with my editor now, and it should be coming out next year. So my sort of plan has been crowdfund the purchase of the building, write the book about it, and then do renovation. So I'm kind of coming to the end of the book part and starting the renovation part. And the kind of support that I've received since the purchase came through that has enabled me to keep the project going and pay our bills from month to month and start to look towards renovation is monthly subscriptions on the Knitting Factory's Patreon page. And so basically what that is I provide a lot of exclusive content, like recordings of writing sort of exercises that you can do. And I share a lot of excerpts from the memoir that's coming up, and just sort of behind the scenes information about the Knitting Factory and some sort of recipes and knitting patterns and that kind of thing. And people can sign up to give a monthly donation at any level that works for them. They also get stickers and mugs and tote bags and things like that. And so that sort of community of supporters has been the biggest thing that has enabled me to pay our bills here every month and move forward toward renovation. So if people are interested in supporting the Knitting Factory, that is the best way you can do it. And I'm so grateful for our Patreon supporters.
Oh, lovely. So I'm going to get you to give me all that information so I can put it in the show notes, Betsy, so anybody listening now can access those that you mentioned, the Patreon page, your website, and so on. Yeah, wow. So what's next, Betsy?
Well, yeah. So next, I'm hopefully within the next few weeks, I'm finishing the edits for my memoir and sending it off to my editor, and so it will be published with Simon and Schuster in the US and Hachette in the UK. This is actually my first book that will be officially published in the UK and Ireland, which I'm also really excited about. My novels are all only distributed in the US, so you can order them online here and that kind of thing, but you wouldn't walk into a bookstore and see them. But this memoir will be in your average bookstore in Ireland, and which is really exciting for me because, usually I'll tell people I'm a writer and they'll say, oh, where can I get your books? And I say, oh, only in the States, So that's great. And And then I'll be looking ahead to getting renovations done. So my hope is eventually to have the space be its own sort of self-contained apartment that that single parents or anyone can come and stay. And then my sort of long-term hope for the Knitting Factory is that I can get it up and running to the extent that I can offer group writing retreats here, similar to the ones I offer at Kylemore Abbey, and that eventually I could hire another single mom as an on-site manager so that she could have a stable home to live in with her kids and run the space. And so that's, once the renovation is done, that's my hope.
Oh, and that's my hope for you too. Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, gosh. Oh, thank you so much, Betsy. It's been just so lovely and refreshing to talk with you, and to hear all your, just that, yeah, tenacity is the word that just stands out for me when I think about what you've just talked about. So yeah, fair play. So thanks a million for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking with you. And it's always, you know, I didn't know that you had also been a single parent, but it's always my favorite people to talk to. So I'm really glad to. Yeah, but it's an experience that you don't understand if you haven't been through it, you know. So, and I think it is something to be really proud of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Betsy.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I find Betsy's tenacity for living her life with purpose and meaning inspiring. As well as her academic achievements and success as an author, she has made manifest a dream into an actual place. The old Knitting Factory is now a sanctuary as well as a creative space for her peers. I'm mindful that we have spoken about domestic abuse, and so I'm putting information in the show notes of supports and services if you or someone you know is in need of support. Domestic violence is not always physical, as we discussed, and coercive control is a particularly difficult form of abuse to identify. If you suspect it's happening to you, please get some advice and help. If you're a writer or creative and single mother too, don't hesitate to get in touch with Betsy at the Old Knitting Factory, and I'm putting all her contact details in the show notes below. If you've enjoyed listening, please like, subscribe, and share it with others. It makes it easier for other people to find the podcast. And if you have a story to tell about a pebble in your shoe, please get in touch. I'd love to talk with you and share it with our listeners. As well as hosting this podcast, I'm a personal growth coach at the Daisy Coaching Hub. My coaching practice provides one-to-one coaching for personal growth, mental health, and well-being. On my website, www.daisycoaching.ie, you'll find a range of original self-directed personal growth and mindfulness resources that are designed to support, nurture, and energize you on your own personal growth journey. I look forward to sharing the next episode of The Pebble in My Shoe with you. So, bye for now.